So we've got flexibility. What comes to your mind? What do you think we're going to talk about when it comes to flexibility? Stretching. That's really what we're going to talk about. We're going to be talking about stretching and those things. We're going to be talking about what flexibility is and how we assess it and also how we program and some of those things. But at the end of the day, this is going to go pretty quick because flexibility is not as complex as some of the other things we talked about. There's not as much to it. When it came to cardiorespiratory endurance and muscular strength and endurance training, the more you did it, the more benefits you saw, right? The more health benefits, the stronger I got, the better my heart got. Well, when it comes to flexibility, if you can achieve a normal range of motion for your joints, you're going to see some general health benefits, and then it kind of stops there. Becoming more flexible doesn't give you any more benefits, like more increased muscular strength or those types of things did. At the end of the day, being flexible enough to cram yourself into a suitcase isn't any better than someone who has just a normal range of motion. Does that make sense? And so we see those types of things, and so it's just not as complex. In grad school, I had an 800-page textbook on flexibility, and I can sum it up in one word. We know that as long as you are somewhat flexible, you're going to see the health benefits that we talk about today, right? More flexibility doesn't mean better health benefits after we get to a certain point. So, when it comes to flexibility, remember flexibility is simply the ability to move a joint through a full range of motion. The ability to move a joint through a full range of motion. This is a very general definition because A, do we have different types of joints in our body? Yeah, each one of those has a different range of motion. B, does the range of motion in my shoulder, could that be different than the range of motion in your shoulder? Yeah, it definitely could be. So it's what's the normal range of motion for you, and that's part of flexibility, figuring that out. Realize there are two types of flexibility. We have static flexibility and dynamic flexibility, dynamic flexibility. What's the difference between static flexibility and dynamic flexibility?
Static is still, like sitting still, dynamic is moving.
Yeah, so static is kind of still, and dynamic is moving. Which one of these do you think we do more often? Static flexibility, like which one affects our daily lives more often? Static flexibility or dynamic flexibility?
Dynamic is more beneficial, but a lot of people tend to do static.
So when it comes to training, people tend to do static, but through your everyday life, we tend to do dynamic more often, right? Think about this morning when you woke up. Let's say you went for cereal on the top shelf, right? When you went to get that cereal, how did you do that? Like when you had to reach for on that top shelf for the cereal.
Stretch your body.
You just kind of went up there, grabbed it, and came back down, right? No one went for the box of cereal this morning and went like, I got it. Right? Like no one just stood there and just held that box there for a little while, right? You just grab it and go. The only time we really use static flexibility is typically when we're lazy, right? Like if you drop the remote off the couch, like behind the couch, and you're trying not to get up, and you're like leaning down, just stretching a little bit more until you get it. That's how we're using that, but most of the time we're using dynamic flexibility, where movement occurs very quickly. Does that make sense? We'll look at those a little bit more. Realize your flexibility is affected by your muscles and your nervous system. There are several different things that affect our flexibility. The first one is joint structure. The way your joint is actually structured will affect your flexibility. First of all, joint type makes a difference, right? Your shoulder is what they call a ball and socket, and so we have a wide range of motion there. We have less range of motion in something like my elbow, which is more of a hinge style, which is joint structure itself. Realize each joint is structured in a way that allows for something. So my elbow joint allows for me to move about, almost 180 degrees. A little less so, but almost 180 degrees. And when I straighten my arm out, like it stops, right? It stops when it's straight. And that's because there's a bone in my humerus that connects with my other bones in my arm and allows it to stop right there. Have you guys ever known someone that has like that weird, like when they extend their arm, it goes past straight? You know what I'm talking about? Like their elbow kind of comes up. Well, that person's joint structure is a little bit different than mine. Of that bone that I have that stops mine, theirs is maybe a little bit smaller. Doesn't connect in the same spot and allows them to move their arm through a greater range of motion. Does that make sense? Right? So joint structure can affect that range of motion, person to person, or joint to joint. Is joint structure something I can affect to improve my range of motion? Can we change our joint structure in order for us to be more flexible?
Unless you get surgery or something like that. No.
Right, there's no easy way at least, right? I guess you could get surgery for it. It's kind of weird, but you could get surgery for it. Some people, I guess, have, and that could improve your range of motion. The only other way that I truly know how to affect your range of motion by joint structure is through an injury. If you've ever injured a joint, does it become more or less flexible typically? Usually less, right? Like if we think about actually affecting the bone, someone breaks their wrist, typically after that wrist break, they may be a little less flexible in that wrist for the rest of their life. You guys following? So when it comes to it, there's not much we can do on a practical level to affect joint structure, to improve our flexibility, unless it's surgery or you just hit yourself with a hammer, which I don't recommend, right? Like there's much easier ways. But then we also have muscle elasticity. What's muscle elasticity? What are we talking about here? How stretchy our muscles are, or how easy it is to pull them apart. So our muscles are resting, how easy is it for us to stretch them or pull them apart? You got to think, if our muscles are really tight and it's hard to pull them apart, is it going to be easy for me to bend down and touch my toes? No. If those are more stretchy, if those are more easier to pull apart, is it going to be easier for me to pull myself down to touch my toes? Yes. Okay, cool. I was like, come on, give me a little something, right? Can we change how elastic our muscles are? Yes, through stretching. The main thing that happens when we do stretches that we're going to talk about in this class is the fact that we increase our muscles' elasticity. We make them easier to pull apart, make them more stretchy. And so this allows us to have a greater increase in range of motion, okay? And so this is the main ways we change how elastic our muscles are. We get them a little bit looser, easier to pull apart. Finally, we have our nervous system. Our nervous system plays a role in our flexibility. It actually does. So let's talk about it, and then we'll see if you guys think we can affect this. So you guys have been to the doctor at some point in your life, right? When you go to the doctor, like for a physical, like maybe it's been a while, but you've gone there. Have you guys ever been hit in the knee with one of those like pointy little hammers, right? And they hit you in the knee, and when they hit you in the right spot, what happens is your leg kicks up, right? Well, your doctor's checking your reflexes. They're checking to make sure that your legs and your arms are communicating with your brain. But there's a system there that is actually all about your body's flexibility. So if instead of hitting it with a hammer, if we think about what happens in real life to get that motion to happen, it's basically my legs getting pulled behind me like really, really fast and really hard. And so right here below your kneecap, there is a tendon, and your doctor hits it, and what happens is that tendon stretches really fast and really far. It stretches really fast and really far because they hit it with a hammer. And what you see is your nervous system taking over and kicking your leg forward. But if this was to happen in real life, what would happen is someone literally took my legs trying to force it behind my head, and that tendon gets stretched. The body's like, ooh, if we keep bending, if we keep going this route this quickly, we're going to injure something. And so my body says, ooh, we want to protect ourselves from moving any further in this range of motion. And so what we see a straightening of the leg, trying to prevent that leg from going behind our head. Does that make sense? Right, you guys following that? So that's how our nervous system is affecting our flexibility. It's keeping us safe, preventing us from going too far and causing an injury. Yes?
Okay, this might not be the same thing, but like, have you ever been like standing and somebody comes behind you and like knees you in your knee? Like behind you?
Yeah, like you kind of collapse.
If you kind of collapse?
Yeah, like what is that?
That's just more your knee, like you weren't using your muscles, your bones were supporting you. And when they broke that support, like you go down because your muscles weren't working. And then once your muscles catch you, then you stand back up. Yeah, so not quite that same system, but we have this nervous system being affected. We can see that it's actually doing it, right? Real life. Can we change our nervous system to allow us to be more flexible? See a lot of no's? Believe it or not, we actually can. We can actually change our nervous system to make it where we're a little bit more flexible. We'll talk about how we do that, but we also have to be careful with this. Because when we start affecting the nervous system, it could make us more likely to get injured. Right? Because that's a protective mechanism. So have you guys ever been maybe watching some type of activity and like it's during warm-ups, like it's pregame or something, like whatever the activity is, and ooh, this player went down. And you're like, huh, that's not good. Now let's go to the replay, and like they show it, and that player's like, he's warming up on the sidelines and he does something stupid. He just like jumps up in the air and then he's like on the ground like, oh, I hurt myself, right? And like you're in the middle of your living room doing the same thing, being like, I can't hurt myself, right? Like trying that, and you're like, how did he do that? What happens is athletes change their nervous system to be less responsive, less protective, because it will make them a little bit more flexible and allow them to be a little bit faster and a little bit stronger. But when you do it too much, it makes it really easy for you to get injured. You can't get injured doing the same thing that athlete did because your nervous system is protecting you, where theirs was not. We'll talk about how we can adjust this, but we always just want to make sure we don't go too much. Make sense? So we've got all this, so we do want to talk about some of the benefits to flexibility. What are some of the benefits we're going to see if we achieve a normal range of motion? The first one is joint health. Your joints are going to become healthier when you go put your joints through a full range of motion. When you do flexibility exercise, your joints will become healthier. So joints, a joint is anywhere where two bones come together. Typically, we're most worried about our joints that have movement, like my elbow or my knee, something like that. Well, where two joints come together and we have movement, so think about like this being my knee joint or my elbow joint, right? Or like where those come together, is that when we move it, is that just two bones rubbing across each other? Like my elbow, when I move it like this, is that just two bones rubbing across each other? No, that would be extremely painful, wouldn't it? Right? So between our joints, between the two bones where they come together and we have movement, we have what we call a joint capsule. Okay? A joint capsule. And so I want you to think about a joint capsule kind of like a Tide Pod. You guys know what Tide Pods are? Yeah? You guys ate one for breakfast this morning, right? Okay. So you got those Tide Pods. So it's kind of like squishy. It's gelled. It's sealed off, right? The gel can't come out very easily. Well, that's what you have between all of your joints. And that's called a joint capsule. Basically, it's like a Tide Pod. Those two bones sit on it and allows it to be cushioned so as it moves, the bones don't rub up against each other. Now, that joint capsule in your body is just like the Tide Pod. It's completely sealed off. There's nothing getting in, nothing really getting out easily. Does that make sense? And so what happens is these joint capsules need to get like oxygen in. They need to get blood in. They need to get nutrients in. And they need to get waste products out. But they don't have like a blood supply that's going to do it for them. So the way that they get nutrients in and waste products out is simply when you move your elbow joint through a full range of motion, you apply pressure to that joint capsule and force nutrients in and waste products out. So think about taking that Tide Pod in your fingers and just kind of rolling your thumbs across it back and forth. The pressure is going to change back and forth. And so maybe you squeeze a little bit of that out, right? Of that little fluid out. Maybe it comes through. Same thing happens through joint health in these joint capsules. And so moving every joint through a full range of motion every day actually will make them healthier. Make it so you have less aches and pains. Make it so they hurt and are a little bit less stiff. This also helps to prevent back pain and back injuries because you make your back a little bit healthier. And if we're flexible enough to do things properly, we're less likely to injure them. So if there's a big heavy box on the ground, how are you always told to lift something big and heavy off the ground? Lift with your legs, not your back, right? So you're supposed to squat down, lift with your legs, not your back. But if I'm not flexible enough to be able to squat down and pick something up, right? Like if I can't, my hips are too tight and I can't get into that position, all of a sudden we're like, well, you know what, I'll just bend over, right? I'll bend my back over. All of a sudden we're lifting with our back and we injure it. Flexibility helps with this. Anyone ever gotten a muscle cramp? Yeah, muscle cramps suck, right? We don't want them every day. Well, realize doing flexibility exercise can help prevent cramps because we loosen up those muscles, we make them more elastic. Also, it's a good way to help alleviate cramps. So if you have a cramp, you can actually make it where kind of get rid of it quicker by doing flexibility or stretches because it pulls that muscle apart, allowing it to relax. Is that the most comfortable thing to do? No. But sometimes alleviating that pain quickly is worth a little bit of more pain as you're doing it. Does that make sense? Where's the worst place, just as curiosity, where's the worst place to get a cramp at? Where do you think? Calves are bad. I agree, calves are bad. Don't get me wrong. I've had calves. I've had them pretty much in every muscle I can think of for the most part. Not a lot in the upper body. Tends to be more in my lower body that I get them. But I don't think it's the calf is the worst. What were you saying? I think the bottom of the foot's the worst place to get a cramp. If you've never had it, like right in the arch, like if you get it right in the arch of the bottom of your foot, what happens is your toes literally curl up and you're like, ah! And the only way that you can get rid of it is like you get on the ground, you're like stepping, you're like, ah! Right? And like you just feel like you want to just cut the foot off is how bad they hurt. Don't get me wrong, calves suck as well. Man, I hate the bottom of the foot even worse. Okay? Especially get them in both feet. It's terrible. It's terrible. I'm telling you. It has happened to me. It's absolutely terrible.
What were you doing?
It just, I was laying there. Just go down. I was like, ah! Wife thought I'd been shot. wish I would have been shot. I think it would have been less pain. So we have this. Also, when you improve your flexibility, when you get a full range of motion in all your joints, you improve your body position. Mean that we're going to do everything properly, from standing to sitting to working at our computer to walking across campus to lifting boxes. And part of that is because we're going to actually improve our posture. So you guys see me this semester, like my shoulders are always rounded over. I'm kind of bent over forward a little bit. Well, a lot of that is actually because my chest muscles are really, really tight. They're really, really tight all the time, and so that pulls me forward, and it makes me bad posture and causes other kinds of issues. And so if I improve my flexibility, if I loosen these muscles up and things like that, and I'm able to pull my shoulders back more often, that's going to give me better posture and also better balance. Because it basically puts my center of gravity in the correct spot so that I can maintain my balance a little bit easier. Finally, being flexible and doing stretches and working on your flexibility actually makes it so that you can relax better. So you guys ever had those really long days, like where you're doing stuff, school, work, whatever, and you get home at the end of the night and you're just ready to relax and chill and be done, and you go to sit on your couch or lay in your bed, you're like, ugh, like I just feel like I need to get up and move? Is that just me? Or like, okay, I see some, you're like, oh, well, your body's having trouble relaxing. Realize getting up and doing some flexibility, some stretches, that type of thing, can actually help those muscles to relax a little bit more and allow you to relax and just be able to sit in your chair and not worry about things or feel like you have to get up and move. It actually is beneficial. Does this make sense? Right? Not too complicated. So, with that being said, we want to talk about assessment. Assessment and flexibility. Realize when it comes to assessment, there are two ways that we can assess our flexibility. We have specific flexibility and general flexibility. So specific flexibility is looking at one joint and one joint only, such as my right shoulder. The way that we typically assess that is through how many degrees can I actually move that arm. So we start it down by our sides and we raise it up beside us and we see how many degrees can we move it. So we would know here, like kind of going this right here, 90 degrees, making like, that right angle, and then straight up and down would be 180, so something like that. And there's a fancy device that can help us measure that called a goniometer, something similar to a protractor. That would be the best way to measure our specific flexibility. It's not always possible that way, so sometimes it's a comparison. Looking at, knowing that my shoulders should go about straight up and down, and so we look at someone and say, did they get pretty close? Right? It's different for everyone. Maybe they got pretty close, and so we could say, yeah, they have normal range of motion or they have poor range of motion. Does that make sense? Right? So we can look at it that way. If I was to look, let's say we did it, so the way it would look in my shoulder is I would literally take the shoulder down by my side and I'm going to move one joint and one joint only. And so we start moving that shoulder joint like this way up and around, and we see how far we can get it. When we do that, we want to make sure that we only move this joint. You see my hand at my chest, and that's because I'm trying to make sure I don't use this muscle, trying to pull the shoulder forward or back. And so I'm simply just rotating it up. My elbow needs to be straight, and my wrist needs to be straight, and my fingers. And we're going to see how far we can move it. And eventually we get to somewhere where we can't move it anymore. So if you guys see, the idea of this is to get my arm like 180 degrees, straight up and down. If I get to here, what do you think? Is that good, below average, above average? What do you think?
Like 160?
It's below average, for sure. Like, yeah, it's 160. That's a good bit below average. We're trying to get to here, right? And I'm getting to here. So you would do things like that, and that's specific flexibility. Realize the key is to move one joint and one joint only. If I cheat this method, I can make it so it looks like I have a greater range of motion. If I come up to here, and this is about as far as I can get, but I bend my elbow a little bit, I can get a little further. And if I actually turn my back a little bit, I can make it so it looks like I have normal range of motion, even though I don't. Does that make sense? Right? So it's one joint and one joint only. If I know the flexibility of my right shoulder, that's great. Right? We can point that out. If I know the flexibility of my right shoulder, does that mean I know the flexibility of my left shoulder as well?
No.
No? So what does that mean I have to do?
The other one.
I got to test the other side. If I know the flexibility of both shoulders, does that tell me how flexible my arms are completely? No. What else are we missing? We're missing our elbows. We're missing our wrists. We're missing our fingers, right? So specific is really good because we can figure out exactly where you're good and where you're bad. But the problem with specific flexibility is we've got to measure every joint in the body. There's a lot of those, and that takes a lot of time. Does that make sense? So we make sure we get the most information, but sometimes it's not the most practical way to do it. And so we've got that. And so the other thing that we have is general flexibility test. The general flexibility test is a test that measures multiple joints at one time and gives me a good picture of what the flexibility is across most of my body. Does that make sense? Right? So it says multiple joints, it gives me a good picture without having to test all of them, what the flexibility is across my entire body. The one you guys are most familiar with is the sit and reach. The sit and reach is probably the most common. You guys have all done that, right? With a little box, you put your feet out, right? The idea behind that is we're measuring your lower back and mainly your hip flexibility. Typically, hips is where people are their worst. If they have good hip flexibility, typically the rest of their joints are pretty flexible as well. This one test can give us a good picture of our entire flexibility. However, it could hide things, right? If I am really flexible in my right shoulder and not as flexible in my left shoulder, this test might not show that, right? It may just say, well, you got decent flexibility across your entire body, but not show me where that is, or you don't, and so it doesn't let us know where to focus in on. Does that make sense? Key with these particular tests, especially the general ones, is they have to be done 100% correctly to be something that we can actually use. Most of you have been cheating the sit and reach your entire life. All of you look at me like, some of you are like, yeah, some of you are like, no. Well, yeah, the sit and reach, most of you know that when you do the sit and reach, you're supposed to keep your legs, nice and straight, not bend, right? You got them flat up against the box and you start, and you're kind of reaching. Well, when you do that, your hands are supposed to be directly on top of each other, no kind of one sticking out further than the other. I've seen that plenty, right? Sometimes those will get caught. And then when you start that sit and reach, you're supposed to reach out and see how far you can push it, and you're trying to get to your toes, whatever. Well, when you do that, you're actually supposed to have a nice, flat, straight back, and your shoulders are supposed to be pulled back, and you're only supposed to kind of bend at your lower back and your hips. What most people do is initially in that test, they 100% cheat. What they do is as soon as they say go, they push their shoulders forward and get a couple inches, and then they start rounding the top of their back instead of just their lower back and their hips, and they start cheating that exercise. And so this throws off those results. Does that make sense? You guys get that? Cool. So lab number 11, or sorry, 9, different class. Sorry, yeah, I know we skipped. Lab number 9 is actually you're going to do these flexibility tests. You're going to have to do the general, so the sit and reach. So if you have a sit and reach box at your house, you can do it with that. Most of you probably do not, which does not surprise me. And so your lab goes over, and there's a video on D2L as well, how to use what they call the yardstick method. So you basically put a ruler down, or you put a piece of tape down on the floor and put your feet at it, and you reach and you see how close you can get to it, whether that's past the line or behind the line or whatever, and then you measure that distance. Okay, the yardstick's there, and you put your feet at 24 inches and you only got to 20. Cool, you were 4 inches behind that line, -4 inches. Does that make sense? Your lab talks about how to do that. That's your general. You'll also at the bottom of it have your specific flexibility exercises. It'll show you all the joints you need to measure and how those are supposed to look with a little picture. Kind of shows you the degrees. You're going to do the comparison model, have someone look at you or stand in a mirror and do it. And you're going to do those exercises with both left and right side and say, yes, I achieved kind of what they wanted. Yes, I had normal range of motion, or no, I did not. And there's a little box down at the bottom for left and right side with each exercise. Pretty simple. Make sense? Cool. So that will be what you guys will do for lab 9. We're almost out of time, so we'll finish this chapter on Wednesday and then go on to the next one. You'll get another lab for sure on Wednesday, and then your exam is a week from today. Okay? Your exam will be in class, face-to-face. You need to bring a pencil and a Scantron. Okay? Make sure that you study for it. Start looking over everything: flexibility, muscular strength and endurance, cardiorespiratory endurance, fitness, and wellness chapters. It'll be approximately 50 questions. Okay, approximately 50 questions, somewhere around in there. Mostly multiple choice, true, false, maybe a couple of short answers that you could write at the bottom of your Scantron. Not a big deal. Questions about your exam, concerns about it? You'll have your class time. I will hand those out promptly, if not a little bit early in class. If you come in late, you get less time to take your exam because you'll only have 50 minutes. So I encourage you to be here early and on time. If nothing else, you guys have a fantastic day, and I'll see you on Wednesday.